It started on a Saturday. The macaws had been silent for 9 years. They were not silent anymore. Lillian Cosgrove had kept scarlet macaws on her back patio in a screened aviary since 2014. They were a pair, Magnus and Tessa, both 22 years old at the time, both adopted from a sanctuary that closed when its founder died. They had lived with Lillian quietly the way old parrots live, a little squawking at sunrise, a little gentle mimicking of the kitchen radio, and otherwise for 9 years an almost monastic calm. Lillian was 62. She was a retired English teacher who grew tomatoes. She grew them well. She had taken a blue ribbon at the county fair in 3 out of the last 6 years. She had a long raised bed at the side of the patio, 15 feet by 4, and in early August it was so thick with vines that she had to angle her body sideways to reach the fruit at the back. That Saturday, her son Casper and her granddaughter Wren arrived for a weekend visit. Wren was 2. Wren had been walking for 10 months. Wren had 2 interests in life, small animals and red round objects. Within 9 minutes of arriving, Wren was at the tomato bed. Casper was bringing in luggage. Lillian was making lemonade. Wren picked a small cherry tomato off a low vine and held it up in a tiny fist and laughed. Magnus screamed. It was a sound the macaws had not made in the entire time Lillian had owned them. It was not the casual squawk. It was the alarm call, the high, sustained panic screech that scarlet macaws make in the wild when a predator is moving below their roost. Tessa joined him. The 2 parrots threw themselves against the wire of the aviary and screamed and screamed and screamed. Wren stopped laughing. Wren looked at the birds. Casper came running from the driveway. Lillian came running from the kitchen. They saw their daughter holding a cherry tomato in her fist, and 2 parrots screaming themselves hoarse 12 feet away. Lillian thought the birds had seen a hawk. She looked up. There was no hawk. She thought a snake had gotten into the bed. She crouched. There was no snake. She thought Wren was scaring them. She moved Wren 3 feet away. The birds kept screaming. Casper reached for the tomato in Wren's hand. Lillian, in the same instant, said, "Don't let her eat that." She did not know why she said it. It was a sentence that arrived in her mouth without going through her head. She would later think about that for a long time. She put the tomato in a small bowl on the picnic table and took Wren inside. The birds went silent within 30 seconds. The silence was somehow worse than the screaming. Lillian called her county extension agent, a woman she had known for 20 years. She described what had happened. She described the tomato. The agent asked her one question. She asked, "Did you have any treatment done to the property recently?" Lillian had not. The agent asked, "Did your neighbor?" Lillian thought, 2 weeks earlier the man behind her had hired a service to spray for emerald ash borer. The trucks had been there for 3 hours. There had been a slight breeze. The agent said, "Get the tomato to the county lab. Today. Drop it at the front desk. I'll have it tested first thing Monday." She paused. She said, "I would not let your granddaughter put anything else from that bed in her mouth until we know." The pesticide that came back from the lab was an organophosphate. It was approved for use on commercial trees. It was not approved for residential drift. The concentration on the tomato skin was 14 parts per million. The threshold for acute pediatric exposure was 6. Lillian called the pediatrician on Monday afternoon. The pediatrician asked her one question. She asked, "What did Wren eat yesterday?" Lillian said, "Nothing from the garden." The pediatrician said slowly, "You understand how close that was." She did not finish. If you stay for stories about what animals sense before we do, you're in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Lillian dug up the entire tomato bed that summer. She brought in fresh soil. She paid for a fence between her property and the neighbors. She wrote a letter to the homeowners association. The letter was 4 pages long. Has a bird, a cat, or a dog ever alarmed at something specific in your house or yard? And you later understood why? Tell us. We read every one. The macaws never made the alarm call again. Lillian listened for it for the rest of that summer. They went back to their casual squawking at sunrise, their gentle mimicking of the kitchen radio, their monastic calm. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. In October, Wren came back for another weekend. She walked into the yard. She looked at the new bare bed where the tomatoes had been. She turned around. She walked to the aviary. She put one small palm flat against the wire. Magnus walked across his perch and pressed his beak gently against her palm through the wire. He stayed there for a long time.